Hello everyone, I hope you're doing great today and I hope you all enjoyed these stories. Make sure you check out my Patreon if you want to support my channel and get early access to my stories, and make sure you check out my podcast in the description below. I have a quick message before the video starts. I think that if you're someone who struggles with mental health and feels alone in it might seem like you're very alone in what you're dealing with, but trust me, there's lots and lots of similar people out there who are experiencing the same things as you are and understand. Even for myself, having social anxiety previously, I understand how it feels, but I promise you that there's help out there and others who understand. Just make sure that you keep going and seek the help that you need. So, I hope you enjoyed these stories and I'll speak to you all soon. Take care. Now, about 15 years ago, I travelled to Spain with my best friend. We were both around 20 at the time, living the carefree young adult life. You know, two guys having a great time. We're in a warm country. No carefully filled itinerary whatsoever. Just living in the moment, doing whatever we feel like. My friend, who originally come from Spain, still had family there, which makes the month-long travel very affordable since they offered us free accommodation, a working bathroom with fresh showers and free meals a day if we wanted it. They also given us a spare key so we could come and go when we wanted. During the day, we'd often go swimming to keep us as cool as possible during the evenings. We'd often go explore the city. We went for drinks or went to a club. On a certain day, somewhat more at the end of our month-long stay there, the father of our host house, my friend's uncle, took us out for a fishing trip. We had a lot of fun out on the sea, although the trip was cut short because we had a bit too much fun with the beers. The burning summer sun, too many beers, and the wavy feeling of being out on the seas made for a very bad case of seasickness for both my friend and me. His uncle thought it was funny. After having an afternoon rest, or as they called it, siesta, and a very fulfilling late night dinner, we decided to go back out to the beach. We took a couple of cold beers with us. However, we didn't take as many as we were feeling a bit groggy from before. It was a beautiful night, open sky, no clouds and no light pollution, making the twinkling stars very visible and present. Being on vacation, being young, on a warm but comfortable summer's night with a light breeze was a perfect moment to talk about the meaning of life, about what we like to achieve one day, and what was worth it and what wasn't. If there was any other intelligent life out there, and so on. The crashing of the waves against the sand of the beach and the rocks was very calming, lulling us into an almost meditative state. Only that moment in that place seems to exist, with no world outside of it, no life and no responsibilities, no obligations and no expectations, no working hard to get somewhere. It was that moment that we noticed something is off. The crashing of the sea against the sand of the beach sounded different, harder, like something was moving in it. Under the waves, a vague shape starts to form. As it is a shoreline, it appears to be a dog. We both looked at each other and noticed that we'd been holding our breaths for about a minute, that it took the dog to crawl from the sea to the shoreline. The tension broke because we both burst out laughing how we were so easily startled by something innocent. But then, my friend starts asking the question that made the newly rained light mood instantly go away. Where did that dog come from though? There's no one around and we never saw it go into the sea. Neither of us saw any dog swimming around and it come from under the water. Now, when he worded it like that, it seems rather curious, and actually, it could have been that that dog was there before, but as it was crawling along the beach, solely illuminated by the first quarter of the moon, it looks the size of a small horse almost, but in the shape of a dog or wolf with matted fur. It had been very present, with bony joints in its knees and elbows, and walks awkwardly a bit. My friend and I are debating if we should follow the beast, and we did actually want to find out exactly what it was. I took out my phone and started filming. from as far away as possible really, on a 2008 smartphone in the dark. By the time we reached the place at the beach where it had been, it already reached the sand dunes and disappeared in it. We saw it had left the track and decided to follow it into the dunes. We weren't prepared for what we saw next though. The beast had left a track in the wet sand from individual hoof prints in a straight line of a crisscross pattern, like any four-legged animal, but no horse could have walked in a straight line like that, even though it almost looked as though it was horse in shape. But horses aren't aquatic animals. We followed the track to the dunes and went over the first dune when we saw the beast standing about 10 meters from us. In a speck of moonlight, it didn't look like a dog either. It looked like it had the lower half of a goat and the upper half of something like a werewolf or just something. The dimensions are off, the shapes are awkward, and it was such a big animal neither of us could really place it under any existing animal that we knew of, with massive fur and bony joints, that had just come out of nowhere from underwater, but clearly it could walk and survive on land as well. Now it also left hoof marks in a straight line. Because we'd just stumbled through the bushes closely behind the beast and given away our presence, it slowly turned its head in towards us. While it was turning, it stands up on its legs. Now not only was this the animal that come from underwater, as well as could survive on the land and walk on 4 legs, it could clearly stand and walk very well on 2 legs as well. The beast gained even more size by standing on its hind legs that must have been around 2.5 meters long. It stared at us with red glowing eyes. These were not to be mistaken with eyes of any nocturnal animal which have reflective eyes. These have a glow in it. I felt stuck in my spot, completely frozen, but luckily my friend, who was 2 steps behind me, had the mind to run away and pull me with him. We ran for what felt like forever, but was probably closer to 10 minutes because we reached the house of my friends. Now the beast hadn't followed us, or at least not all the way that we'd gone. Now, I didn't know what to make of this. We went in and told the entire story to his uncle. Of course he thought that we must have been drunk and that we made up the whole story. But when we showed him the recording, he went pal, took a shovel. To be honest, a gun would have been more impressive against a beast like that, but it's not like the average European has guns laying around, and asked us to show him where we had seen it. We searched for almost 2 hours but never found it again. However, we find the hoof marks, a bit washed up because of the current waves. We went back home trying to make out what we'd just seen, but couldn't. We needed to know what we'd seen was just an animal, or what was it. We started googling a lot of things, and of course with the lower half of a beast looking like a goat, we stumbled upon lots of myths about the devil, which we disregarded. Had we seen an actual live beast that wasn't known by humanity yet, we began wondering if anyone's seen anything similar. It was only when I googled hoof marks in a straight line that we stumbled upon the devil footprints, so it actually was a thing, or at least something that had been supposedly seen before. But there must be some truth to what the others had seen. Now the few days later that we had left in Spain, we spent our night out with my friend's uncle trying to find the beast again, but to no purpose as we never see it again. When I come home a few days later, I saved the recording on my hard drive. Not sure what to do with it yet. I didn't want to be the crazy guy who's seen the devil, because I still didn't believe it. I just didn't know what we'd come across. I tried to forget about it, but couldn't, and a year later decided to publish the recording, hoping that anybody could make sense of what I'd seen that night. The uncle of my friend hadn't seen the beast in all the time that he'd been there since, and hadn't seen anything like it. Now, I switched my phones by then, but luckily I had the recording on my desktop, where I'd replayed it at least 1,000 times. But I booted up my desktop and something was wrong. I had to restart my hard drive a couple of times, and after booting it up in save mode, I got a message that my hard drive crashed. I tried to recover it, but I couldn't. Now, I'm still trying to figure out what I could have possibly seen that day because I still don't have any ideas what it was. Now, I encountered a black triangle UFO just a little over 20 years ago. Myself and 3 of my friends were all sitting in the backyard on my picnic table. The top of it is so that we're all facing the same way, looking up at the clear night sky one evening in the small town we lived in. We had just left the bar and were chatting about our night and smoking when all of a sudden, out of nowhere, we saw something really big, all black and triangular shape with no lights on it whatsoever, just appear in the night sky. It was a split second that we all saw it move from one end of the sky to the other, and it covers the stars when doing so. This thing is massive, easily the size of a football field, no joke. All of us just looked at each other and explained the same thing. God, did you see that? It was insane, I'll never forget it. Then, a few weeks after the incident, I had a very vivid dream that I was on a very cold operating table with what I could only sense as beings that were not human, and they were tickling me each time they touched me, almost like a faint electrical current. There was more than one of them, and I could actually feel their physical touches. I wasn't able to see anything with what was going on. I'm pretty sure I had something over my face, so I couldn't see them or anything. However, I didn't feel threatened or scared at all. This dream then abruptly ended and I woke up in my bed. It seemed to be so real, and to this day, I fully believe that I was adopted while trying to sleep, so they could study me. I have seen the black triangle in the sky never since, or had any similar things happen to me. I think it's very weird they happened at the same time virtually too. Now, my freshman year of college was spent at a small New England liberal arts school. One night, my roommates and I went to a play put on in campus in a theatre. It's not really like many people are there. Now, we sat in an almost completely empty section to one side. The next part is hard to explain. I become certain that there was a man in an old-fashioned hat, perhaps bowler, sitting a couple of rows down from us, but the thing is, I didn't see him. It was more like the moment when I was consciously aware he was there, and tried to look at him, but he vanishes. And instead, I was left with a strong and specific memory of having been passively aware of his presence and seeing the silhouette of the man moments before. And the moment I realised that he was not there, and the fact that he shouldn't have been, I felt sickened, and I weirdly feel a cold zap through my body. I shrugged it off because I couldn't explain it, but then, a few weeks later, my roommate came back in from having a cigarette and tried to explain to me that she had seen the shape of a man in a bowler hat with a long overcoat standing next to a tree at the end of the parking lot. He was out there for several minutes without his presence feeling unusual or spooky. She just passively becomes aware, but when she tried to actually look at him, she said that she just felt really cold all of a sudden and he wasn't there. I wonder if this was a ghost or something else, since he was seen in 2 areas separately, described the same. And they describe a man in an old-fashioned hat, no features. Interestingly, there's lots of stories about the campus being haunted too, interestingly actually featuring an old man in a slightly different style cap. I was hiking on a trail of which I'm very familiar with, and because of changes in the weather, I decided to leave the trail and cut through the woods. I wanted to try get to my car before a downpour, and I know the area like the back of my hand. However, before I know it, I felt very strange and disorientated and nothing looks familiar. I'm not sure if the woods seemed silent before, or if I felt that way because I become undeniably aware of how silent everything is. Oppressingly downright suffocating silence, and my heart begins to pound as I stood there and felt as though the woods were spinning around and closing in on me like I stepped into something that I cannot comprehend. It was then that I noticed something about 15 feet in front of me. It was 10 feet high and about 8 feet tall and wide and distorted. It felt like something was bending the light and moving towards me like a fogged up mirror, but with no definitive shape, but it was moving with purpose and intelligence and would be completely unnoticeable if not for the distortion within and this thing looking directly at me. I turned to run and realised another's behind me about the same size and shapeless, almost as though that it realises that I'm there, and now there's at least 4 of them closing in on me and I'm trapped. What I'm seeing my brain can't make sense of, and I'm in utter panic now, and shot back and get towards a tree because I was too terrified to run in the direction of those things. I curl up into a fetal position, put my hands over my ears because they began ringing, and the sound was so deafening, and I closed my eyes, and these things cloaked all around me, about 5 feet away. I saw a white flash like happens when you've either been hit really hard in the head or felt punched, or maybe like being in a small accident where you fall and hit your head. That's the best way I can describe it. My ears are ringing, and the flash comes bright and then nothing. I woke up to rain falling on me. Hours have passed. Everything was like normal and I knew where I was. I gather myself and check for injuries and realise I was completely fine and shakingly. I leave the woods and drive home. I can't make sense of what happened. I've googled for similar events but found nothing. Now I really need answers. I stumbled across stealth cloaking technologies used by the military, but it's primitive compared to what I saw. I just don't know. I don't have answers and I don't know why or how it happened to me. Now I'd like to answer to some of the questions I had. Now I will definitely be seeing a doctor, but I have no history of seizures or any other mental health things that would cause this. In my 20s, and I'm fairly fit and sound of mind. I'd rather be safe than sorry, but this happened in Ireland, and I was in the Midlands. I won't be too specific. Headaches and blurry vision have only been an issue after the incident. Now there was definitely no shape to the things or beings, if that makes sense, but they were large enough for moving with purpose and intelligence. I could smell something which I thought was my brain being fried from how loud the sound was. I know how insane this all sounds, but I actually had to cover my ears and crouch down, almost in a fetal position out of fear from the sound and panic, just before I blacked out. Now it almost smelled like there was a sulfur metallic smell around me. Then the flash occurred that was blinding and I wake up hours later. I was considerably dry even though it was drizzling when this occurred, and when I woke 4 hours had passed but it was raining heavily, but I'm basically dry. I can't explain it, but there has to be a reason for it all. I won't lie, I'm shook up and a little bit scared now. I was in an area impossible for me to get lost in too. A child maybe, but not an adult, and not someone as familiar with the place as I was, to the point that I couldn't recognise it whatsoever. This happened in the American Southwest to my parents while on vacation. They had stopped at a spot along their travel route to get some food and got talking to a young local who worked there. He told them about a box canyon that was on the way to the next stop. For those of you who don't know, a box canyon is characterized by being narrow, having high vertical walls and a flat bottom. To hear my mum tell it, it was described as a canyon with an almost spiritual resonance, saying that it was incredibly beautiful and had superb acoustics. And the guy told my mum that he loves to play his guitar out there and just have a good time. Now my folks love doing stuff off the beaten path, so decide to pay it a visit. Now the canyon itself appeared to be quite isolated, no buildings of any kinds around it for miles. By the time they parked their car and made it into the canyon's entrance, the sun was just starting to go down. They said they seemed to be the only ones there, with no other parked cars around other than their own, and they make their way into the canyon. Now, my parents both have said the same thing separately without speaking of it to each other, saying that they had a sense of unease. Now, it's actually not totally unreasonable, as it was starting to get dark and the canyon walls pressed close on either side. Despite this feeling, they continue on until they heard the noise. Now, my parents actually report the noise differently. When I ask them to describe it, their faces kind of scrunch up, almost like it's an effortful task, or they're still uncertain. My dad said it sounded like a person, possibly a man, speaking a low single word that he didn't understand. My mum says that it didn't really sound like a word of any kind to her, just a strange deep noise that rang out from somewhere nearby above them. It was accompanied by a brief, intense flash of pale light. Neither of them knew what it was or where precisely it had come from, but they both felt immediately off and like a feeling of dread was overcoming them, and they were desperate suddenly to leave the canyon. They turned around and booked it to their car. As they exited the dark, close space of the canyon, my mum describes a feeling of uncertainty, like something was chasing them, and thinking that once they got to their car, they would find it sabotaged. Though thankfully it wasn't the case. They're able to get in and speed away down the empty road. My mum said that she didn't feel safe until they'd actually been driving for a while, still having the panicked, but totally unsupported notion that they're being pursued. When they eventually spoke of it to one another, they aren't really able to make sense out of what had happened, because if they had seen something, they could at least pin it to that. Neither one of them can really put down exactly what it could have been. Now, I know this is a pretty dull as far as a spooky experience, but neither of my parents have had a history of weird encounters or tales, so this strikes me as particularly weird. Now, I've since asked my mom to clarify some things, and I forgot to update. She said the flash of light was actually quite close to them, mere feet away, and that it sort of seemed to hang in the air for a few moments. She had a hard time actually describing it, because apparently it's like nothing else. Now, this incident took place in between Chenya, Oklahoma, on a country road called Blacktop Road that flows east into Black Kettle grasslands of Chenya and west out of Chenya towards Aporojo, Oklahoma. When I was growing up in Oklahoma, my family used to show livestock. We arrived in Chenya Livestock Show for the day before show day. I was 11 at the time, I believe, and we just finished unloading the supplies and show hogs, as well as setting up their pens with food and water for the night. Since we lived not too far from Chenya, my dad decided to make the drive back home to Clinton for the night instead of getting a hotel. We took a desolate road due to the large amounts of show materials we had in the back of the 4-door Dodge Ram. We didn't want to risk them flying out onto the interstate. So I want to say that we left Chenya around 11 PM to midnight. I don't remember our exact position on the road, but it was extremely dark. My dad and my older brother were talking throughout the ride, and my dad mentioned that, oh no, I forgot the show sticks. Sometimes people steal show tools, so my dad didn't want to take the chance and turn back around, and about a minute after that, I remembered my dad saying, "What was that?" Me and my younger brother peer up and look while my dad was slowing down, and I think over the years I've replayed this countless times, but we saw a woman in a light coloured dress. I want to say stripped now, like an old prison gown. Her head was kind of tilted upwards like a plea, and she was pale. Her hair straight down blonde, and she appeared as though she's wet. It wasn't raining though, which strikes me as odd. Once we get closer, she began to say something, and it looks like she wanted to say help, but we can't make it out. My brother said, "Go, go, go, don't stop," to my dad, and my dad gunned it and swerves past her. As he did, she slapped the passenger side window really hard while screaming. My dad was trying to calm us down as he was going to turn back around, fearing if someone was in a wreck. We turned the truck back and we're all waiting for her to reappear. The headlights hit her running in the road from a ditch into the middle of the road, screaming at us. This time it spooks my dad because he slams it in reverse and whips the truck around towards Chenya. My dad called the sheriff's office and reports the incident. They went out there to investigate and called us back an hour or so later, informing my dad that they spotted the length of road there but no woman or wreckage in sight. We took the freeway home and didn't really talk much about it afterwards. We have all discussed the incident trying to figure out what we saw that night, and my dad never gave a straightforward answer. He just said that I don't know what this could have been. Now 16 years later, my brother and I drove the road that he was in the front seat at the time. He claims it was Deer Woman, some sort of Native American legend that there've been countless sightings of a woman on that stretch of road that they call the Deer Woman. The road had a turn north without warning about the 5 miles into it. If you're travelling eastbound, you Google Blacktop Road, Chenya, you'll notice a north-south turn. He said that apparently the Deer Woman appears to be trying to warn those of an impending turn, because there's been many accidents there. In addition, we didn't dismiss the idea of it being a real person, and for a long time we thought it was a crazy woman. But when the years rolled on later, we discovered from locals through livestock shows and farmers in the area, especially the Kiowa Cemetery, as well as east of Saya, had reports of sightings of a ghost woman. I say ghost because once reported to law enforcement, usually nothing is discovered. The topic has lots of explanations attached to it as well, as a woman who died in a car crash or Deer Woman. To me it seems no one knows, but the reason why I do believe it was paranormal was the stories that were shared with us about the woman, and it struck as kind of unbelievable, but the features of the woman go along with what we saw. My brother talked a lot about it and divided pretty deep into it, but thinks it might be paranormal, but we just cannot come to a clear conclusion of what exactly this is. Now, the other night around 10 or 11, my mum and I are watching a movie. It's been raining hard, so there was basically just white noise coming from outside. As I'm watching the movie, for some reason or another, the whistler popped into my head. Then I remembered the whistle with its chilling distinct tone. Then I hear the faintest sound of the whistle, but this sound is so faint that I believe it's in my head. Kind of where you hear and see things, but there's no actual noise. But then it got a little louder from outside. I kind of had a moment where I was struck cold and in shock and disbelief. There's no way I'm actually hearing it. It's gotta be the movie. The next one is louder, so I know I'm not imagining it. So I pause halfway through the whistle and I turn to my mum. It ends. A moment later, another whistle, very loud, as if whoever is whistling is standing outside the window now, which is open. I felt a jolt go through my body and I yelled, "Did you hear that?" And my mum said, "Yeah, the whistle. I thought it was a movie." Then goes on to mimic it, and it's exactly like what I heard. This legit gave me chills and freaks me out. Even creepier is how that it just stopped the moment I called and had attention on the TV and muted it. And since we live in the apartment complex, there is constantly people walking around that you can hear, but when the whistling stopped, there was pure silence. There wasn't any sound of movement, but I wasn't going to go near a window and find out. I just sat there and stared at it. Thankfully, the legend states that if you hear the whistle loud and clear, this means he's far away. When it's quiet or in the distance, he's really close. Actually, that makes it creepier because that means that it couldn't have been too far at some point. But God, I really hate what I've heard. Now, around 4 years ago, I trained a new, hard-working, honest guy, early 30s, seemingly healthy and into yoga and had a beautiful girlfriend, etc. He seemed to be very balanced and healthy. I'm gonna name him coworker A. We had another long-time coworker who was sort of Mr. Popular with managers, but honestly super annoying. Really large personality. People mutually could only take him in small doses. He was essentially the embodiment of a frat person who would randomly dance on the job and freestyle. I call him coworker B. Now before I explain, I should include that this workplace sucked. It barely holds a single star on Indeed. It's a large factory without windows, toxic management and long hours. It was very hard on most people's mental health. So anyway, roughly a year into the coworker A's stay, things start changing. He and I were mutually friendly to one another, and we could have long civilized discussions about interesting things. But something was really out of place when he mentioned his new beliefs about the well-being flat and the hologram moon theory. It was really unlike the old version of him, which was actually really rational. I sort of shrugged it off and said it's probably a phase or he's just messing with me. Fast forward a few weeks, coworker A has seemingly took a lot of interest in coworker B and sort of developed some of his mannerisms but in a more endearing way. Kinda copying his silly dances and laughing. Seems harmless, but as the months go on, he continued to dance more and more to the point that he's actually asked to stop by supervisors. He would even be moving around at morning meetings, using all the same mannerisms and phrases as coworker B. The thing that really starts to creep out coworker B is actually to the point that he switches shifts. We theorize that he's on drugs or something, but coworker A was a very vocal person against all substances, including alcohol, and he's also a vegan. Where things start to change for the worse is when coworker B ends up getting a new hire at work. She ends up becoming his girlfriend and they move in together, etc. Now this is when coworker A shows up using coworker B's name. He actually signs himself into the book differently as the other guy. Then that was pretty weird. But later in the day, A stands up on a work table screaming, "I'm in love with coworker B's girlfriend" by name, with his arms spread out in a cross Jesus formation, face to the ceiling. The whole place is silent, and after he ended up standing in a corner with a broom sweeping nothing for the next few hours, he wouldn't turn around from the corner either, not even when tapped on the shoulder or called by name. The only time I saw him away from that corner was when it was his time to go home. He was the last one out. Unfortunately, my job being QC, I'm always among the last ones out too. Despite both of us being the last in the building, I did my best to act normal when passing him in the hallway. I glanced at him. He was looking directly at me, head tilted down, making a weird face, actually with his teeth out. The next day, our boss decided coworker A needs to go to hospital, so we actually made an appointment and got him in the Uber. He was put on leave for a week. Now the security guards who I'm friends with said that apparently he was showing up in the middle of night trying to sign in for work at the card reader, like 2 or 3 a.m. Anyway, surprisingly, a week later, coworker A comes back and seems somewhat normal, almost like he had no recollection of anything. He even wrote an entire album on his phone, which was surprisingly better than I thought it would be. But I noticed all were love lyrics, kind of weird country love songs. As things begin to normalize with coworker A, he stated that he really wanted to hang out with me and go for a hike and throw axes at trees, etc. I sort of didn't agree or disagree. I said I'd get back to him, as I was secretly on edge. He asked me later what day I would actually go, and unfortunately I said I had other obligations. "Well, I guess I can't throw an axe in your face then," he said, and I laughed, not knowing how to react. I told my manager, and he kinda just scratched his head uncomfortably and shrugged his shoulders. Anyway, coworker A finds out where coworker B works, due to a work get-together where everyone was invited. They eventually find rocks and sticks in weird formations on their door. As we all knew collectively it was A, things got really weird when they actually found A looking through the windows at night. He was also scratching the windows with his nails, calling out B's name, whispering, "B, I want to tell you something." This is when our manager finally decides to take action and fires A. 4 years later, coworker A still stalks coworker B's now girlfriend, and actually had to get a restraining order. So, it's a pretty scary experience overall to be a part of. Now, this happened when I was younger, around 8 or 9. I grew up in a reservation in eastern Maine. I lived with my mother and brother who was younger. We lived in a 2 multi-story dwelling unit or public housing. Now, there's vast wooded areas in my backyard surrounded by deep woods, and it wouldn't take much to get lost in them. I always ended up adventuring there and was fairly familiar with the territory. It was late winter with about 4 or 5 inches of snow on the ground, and I heard knocking on the front and back door at the same time at around 1 AM in the morning. I noticed it first, and then my mother got up and told my brother and I to stay in the room. She called the police and went downstairs to see if someone was at the door. We keep hearing knocking, but as my mom got closer to the door, it would suddenly stop. No one was actually visibly out there, and the police eventually show up. Lights up the front of our place. Neighbours actually come out to see what's going on. All of them say that they didn't actually see or hear anyone. The police search around the property to see if anyone was hiding or ran off, but they didn't see anything. A cruiser stayed in our parking lot for the majority of the night in case anyone comes out again. Sunrise came and the officer had left early in the morning. My mother and next door neighbour went outside, and I assumed to talk about what had happened. Then, she notices some footprints in the snow that went along the building leading to our front door, and all the way back up into the forest. But these footprints were strange, as though someone was wearing pointed boots and about size 10 or 12 men's. The prints weren't inverted, normally as though the toes are facing each other, but kind of at an angle facing out. Now the creepiest part about them is that the footprints seemed to move side to side. Toes were inverted and looked as though they jumped from side to side in a perfect line leading to the woods. My mother didn't say anything about them until later in life when I was older. But I knew they were there, it was obvious. I know you're thinking maybe somebody played a prank or faked it, but there were other prints in the snow too, around the strange ones, but only around the building. I assume the other footprints were made by officers due to the fact that they appear normal and follow normal movements and patterns, but there were no other footprints in the snow leading up to the tree line. I followed the footprints into the woods. No other markings around them, just perfectly invented side to side, leading deeper and deeper into the forest. I get to the point where an uneasy feeling washes over me, like something's telling me go back. But I knew where the prints were leading, and it wasn't a familiar area. Now it would have eventually led into a marsh or bog area. I got chilled by that thought and decided to turn back. I never told my mother about it until later on. I never heard of anything similar, and I wondered if I was the only one to experience anything like this. So one day, I was driving to meet my sister for lunch in northern VA, about an hour from my home. It was raining outside and I had pretty much no tread on my tyres, but I didn't know that at the time. Anyway, I'd taken an exit onto a busy highway. If you've ever driven in northern VA, you know that the traffic is absolutely terrible because of all the commuting people from DC. As I was turning / merging onto the highway, my car completely lost traction and began spinning. I spun onto the highway. all the while clutching my steering wheel and hoping for the best. I had absolutely no control and ended up stopping in the middle of the highway facing the direction of oncoming traffic. Here's the weird part. When this happened, there was not a single car on either side of the road or one in sight. Without thinking, I drove my car straight in the opposite direction until I reached a patch of grass. I kid you not. The second my car was out of the way, cars were flying down the road once again, hundreds of them. It was extremely busy on the road once more. My sister even passed me, called me, and asked if there was a reason I parked there. I immediately stopped crying because I suddenly become overwhelmed. Had the traffic been normal, I would have surely been hit head on, certainly killed. I still cannot explain what happened to me to this day. It was like a glitch in the system, or I could have been extremely lucky, but I drive on this road frequently and I've genuinely never seen it like this before. And somehow, no one was there for the duration of my accident. I really don't know what this could have been. I'm a park ranger, and I'd like to share my story with you all today. More in the sense that I want to get some opinions on exactly what happened to me. I mean, I have my own view, but I guess in my line of duty I probably think differently about threats and dangers, so I really want the outside perspective. I haven't really spoke to too many of my friends about these things because, well, even where I work, I guess like rumours spread really easily and things. I mean, it wasn't the other day that I told people at my job that I was going to be leaving soon. And obviously, I didn't give them permission to tell everybody else, but what happened? When I go back, I get complete random people that I barely even speak to saying, "Oh, you're leaving soon?" Yeah, I don't know, it's something that's always annoyed me. I just really don't like it or appreciate it. I feel like it's a big breach of trust, and with something like this happening to me, I don't want that to be the case, but like I said, I want to hear what people think about my experience in my own words, not from the words of others who have potentially misconstrued of what happened, and the truth is what's important here. So, as I said, I'm a park ranger, but I'm going to be leaving the job soon. Now, it's not in the sense that I don't enjoy it like I used to, I just kind of need to evolve as a person, and I think being out there on my own was good for a while, but not for too long. I'm kind of like a social butterfly in the sense that I really need to be around other people, and as much as I enjoy being out there, it kind of becomes the same picture each day, and regardless of how relaxed I feel, I really feel like I need more. And I'm probably too young to have this kind of job in some regards, but not in others. So, I was stationed somewhere that we have a beautiful lake. Now, this lake is absolutely gorgeous. It's one of the most blue ones that you'll ever see. I can't remember exactly why it was so blue, but it was a really beautiful thing. Now, on the day in particular that this event happened, everything was going like normal. I was doing a number of my duties and, well, in my country, one of those duties is to pick up rubbish that people leave behind and litter and things, however you guys say it. I didn't really have an issue with this, it just annoyed me because sometimes in the sun it would make bags melt a bit, and I guess you can imagine how bad that actually smelled. It wasn't a nice thing. But again, someone had to do it, and often it was us. Now, I started picking up some litter which is on the trail, and this actually annoyed me. I think, why on earth do people want to trash this place? I mean, literally, that's all they're doing. But I have my little grabber thing, and I'm putting everything inside the bag. So, to be honest, I'm actually enjoying the time more than I expected to at this point. The trees are given a really nice shade now, so there was no need for me to rush trying to get out of the sun. I have a camel pack, so I'm just constantly drinking from this on my journey. Now the bag gets pretty full, but I kind of had like a holster thing I could hook it onto, so it would kind of hang off the side of me if I use that stick, if that makes sense. But it wasn't too heavy, it was manageable really. Now while I'm doing this, I do notice something strange. There seems to be some kind of diving suit. Well, at least that's how it appears to me. It's probably like, I don't know if you've seen one of the Batmans with Penguin, but the old one. You know the cat lady, the thing she wore in that? It was more similar to that, but obviously it had been in the water at some point. Now, I stop for a moment and think to myself, well, we do get some people that go swimming here, but you wouldn't really want to wear this for that job. And I think this is pretty bizarre. Now, I've prod around a little bit, and I'm worried that maybe it's something weird that shouldn't be here. I gather my thoughts for a moment and realise that it's probably best if I just continue on my way. I'm gonna have to come back for it another time. This is quite annoying really, because I have to go all the way back and get another one of those smelly bags to take this thing. I did try and lift it up originally with my grabber thing, but it was far too heavy and I don't want that dripping on me while I'm walking. It will not be a fun time. But I'm prepared for this and I continue on my trail. I get to a point where I decide that now's a good time to get some food in me and stop for a little bit. I'm eating some of my sandwiches and I've got some peanuts with me when I notice something drifting off in the lake. It's really bizarre. It kind of looks like some kind of boat, but it's definitely not a canoe. It's slightly bigger than that. But it seems to just vanish suddenly. It's almost like it sank down into the water, and I get a little suspicious of this. Now, bearing in mind that I'm actually seeing this through some trees and I'm not 100% convinced myself that what I'm seeing is actually real or not. I also had my cool shades on, so that probably made it a lot harder. I take them off though, and I still can't see much of anything. I don't really have the best of eyes to be honest, and annoyingly I left my glasses back at our old station office, whatever you call it. So, I stand there observing, and I don't see anything initially. I note this is odd, and I think, well, I've got some more trash to pick up, and I continue on my way. Now, one thing I'd like to note is that I didn't see anybody else during this time, which is a pretty bizarre thing because, well, usually you see a couple of people around, but today, it was like one of those western ghost towns of today, where nobody's there but people were once. So, I decided that I should probably get heading back now, but not before I take in a beautiful look at this lake. I think this is really nice here, and I actually take off my boots and take my socks off and put my feet in the water. I found it was a nice way to cool down, and that with the sun on your face is really a nice thing. And as I'm doing so, I hear something in the water. Now again, it sounds like somebody's thrown something, or there's a boat that's just come ashore. I look around, half expecting to see somebody dragging things up, but I can't see anyone or anything. I presume that maybe it's a fish, but I don't think the fish here are that big, and that's not how they would normally act. I decide instead that it's high time just to get back. Now the trash is smelling pretty bad at this point, and I kind of swung it round on itself so that way it wouldn't make that much of a smell when I was walking and would kind of seal on itself. And would you know, it splits open. So now I have to spend a while trying to put things on it again and getting it back to normal and kind of making the bag smaller and the smell stronger. As I'm doing this, I noticed some more trash up ahead of me, which is strange because I was sure I cleared the path perfectly. I now know that people probably come past here recently, and I go to pick it up. It looks like some kind of note, but I don't bother actually looking at it and just put it straight in the bag. I continue on my walk now, and eventually I get back, throw that nasty stuff away, and actually have a shower there. I know that's kind of like ironic to some people listening because obviously I still have to go back for the wetsuit thing, but I just don't want to smell bad. And I'm quite germophobic, I think that's how you say it, but I don't know, I just don't like germs at all, and I was starting to smell a bit where the bag had opened on myself. But not to worry. I have my nice shower and I get a big thick bag now. I make some notes of what I'm doing in the day because where I work we have to log everything that we're doing. It's just like a general process, but it's important for security reasons. So, I say goodbye to the dirty clothes and step out in the new ones with the new bag and everything ready. Now there was some cloud cover, so it was a little bit darker, and it also meant I didn't need my sunglasses, and I could in fact wear my normal glasses, which I was happier doing so. Now I'm able to see a lot more clear this time, and it probably would have been a good idea to bring them before, but that's in hindsight. So I start making my way again, and I realise that there's more and more trash. I keep on putting them in the bags again, and I think this is a little odd, and it's also annoyed me because obviously I've probably left the trowel with this stuff and not realised it, so now I'm doubling up on my job. The other issue I have is that there's more important things for me to do later in the day. I actually have to install a sign somewhere later on, and I'm not looking forward to it because that thing's heavy. So I just continue on and eventually make it up to where that wetsuit thing is. Now that's the thing. I say where it is because I can't find it. I can find the silhouette where obviously it was in the water before and left a water print, but there's no wetsuit to be found. I look around everywhere and I really can't seem to find it. I think maybe it's drifted in again, and what do I see? Just floating off on the shoreline. I can see it, probably about a mile away or something, and it's on the other embankment. This is no issue for me though, my friend, because I have to go over there with that sign, so I'm not too bothered. I just think it's odd because it shouldn't have been able to slip down because it was actually on some high ground, but not the kind something could roll off of, so I think this is bizarre, but again, I think maybe I'm having a bad day and I'm going a bit senile, or I don't know. So I just pick up more and more trash, and that's when I notice something odd. It all seems to be paper with things scrawled onto it, and I think, well, someone must have done some weird art project, or it was some young kid that was doing drawings and their parents didn't want to take it home. Okay, but that doesn't explain why it wasn't there earlier. So I quickly retraced my steps and ended up finishing the trash rounds. Ah yes, my favourite part of being a ranger that I missed so much, and what was actually an addition to what I was doing originally, but we'll talk about that another time. Now, I start walking back and I have a strange feeling. It's almost like there was somebody else there with me, but of course there's no one around. It actually isn't uncommon to have this feeling and sense, and I don't know. I'm not going to say that I'm someone that picks up on these things well, but it's just a feeling I'd noticed a few times before in this line of work. You're taught actually to listen to it and not ignore it because it might be a sign of, I don't know, somebody in danger. But I checked the log and there's no such reports, so I know that there's definitely nothing wrong. So I just kind of shake it off and get back. Now I'm a bit more annoyed because I have to bring this heavy signpost, but that's fine. At least I'm actually going to get that thing that I saw earlier. I decide once again not to log it though, because I'm going to have a long day at this point. So I start my trek. I have to walk quite a number of miles to get through to the other side of the lake, and as I'm walking I notice something. There's two people in a canoe, but I can't really make out much about them. They're kind of in the shadow side of a cloud, if you know what I mean, so I can't really see any details in particular. But they're not supposed to be here. I know that much for absolute certain, and I wave at them and call out. What was a little creepy is they both stop and seem to stare at me. And it could be my eyes playing tricks on me, but it almost looks like one of them's wearing a kind of plague doctor outfit. It's not exactly the same as like the European ones that we had, but it's not far off, and I think this is really weird. Again, I haven't got the best of eyes, and stupidly I don't have binoculars with me, so I can't get a closer look. But I decide that I should meet them on the other side because I think maybe they're the ones who have the wetsuit, and I have a few questions for them. So I start walking now. Every so often I can make them out for a little bit, but then they dart in between trees. My line of view is blocked is what I'm saying basically, but I'm a persistent being, so I keep going. Now, it doesn't take too long, and eventually I get to roughly where they should be, but they're nowhere to be found. I don't know if you guys have seen Pirates of the Caribbean, but it's almost like when the boat just sunk into the water of that weird guy with the tentacles, but they've just vanished now. I'm not really sure exactly what to make of this, but I can only presume that yes, they have gone to the other side of the embankment. Now, I'm not too much further away now, but I'm getting a bit irritated now because this is the kind of stuff that makes you have a really long day. And guess what? My boss doesn't care. He'll just let me have overtime when I'm working till like 9 or 10 at night, then want me to come in at 8 AM the next day. Yeah, you can imagine why I had to leave this place, but anyway, I digress now. So, I'm not too much further away now, and I'm very perplexed about as to where they could have specifically gone. It really doesn't make sense to me how they've just gone under. I mean, is there some kind of big iceberg which I'm missing and they've gone into it like the Titanic? Maybe, but the water doesn't feel that cold. Now, I was so curious as to where they went, I was half tempted to go for a swim. I mean, it'd be quicker than walking, but obviously I'm not going to do that. So I just make my way over to the embankment, and there it is, the wetsuit. It seems to have come snagged upon some logs and things that have fallen off from trees, so I go over to it. And that's when I suddenly feel fear come across my entire body, and I'm kind of froze, just fixated on it without thinking. It suddenly hits me, this could actually be a body. It doesn't look like the wetsuit I saw before, and I think maybe this is a person who's drowned. And I get some adrenaline, and I very slowly proceed. Something feels a little off about this situation, and it literally looks like a headless thing there. I get a big stick and I decide to poke it. I know that's 100% not what I'm supposed to do in this line of duty, but I don't know. There's nothing else I can actually think of doing that's probably going to work now. And that's when I realise something rather bizarre. Some kind of stuffing comes out, and it's not a body at all. It's almost like a farmland scarecrow, but it kind of looks weirdly put together, almost like the Catwoman suit. No, this is where things are really weird, because this was the thing I saw earlier, but it didn't have anything in it. So that raises a question. Who filled this thing up, and why was it here on this bank? I think that's really weird, so what do I do next? Well, I grab another stick, an even bigger one this time, and kind of drag it ashore. And there's some stuffing falling out, which is kind of like originally a white colour, but it's gone to more of a dark cream, I guess. And I'm able to take it ashore, and I leave it there. I'm staring at this thing, which is almost like the farmland thing I said about, but not quite, and I don't know what to make of it. I finally call out, hey, whatever you're doing, you're not supposed to be. And I get a response, at least in my head, telling me to get out of there. Now, I guess some of my survival instincts finally kicked in, and to be honest, they're not always the best at all times. Not again for the work I was doing, but that's another reason I left, but hey. So, I start walking back now, deciding that this is something I should probably tell the guys about, and not necessarily investigate alone. I mean, all we've got between me and the relative safety of our office building thing, not a building, but you know what I mean, is the water, and I'm not going to swim. That's when I see what appears to be the two figures I saw earlier, this time on the shoreline. Now I get a much better look at them this time, and this is pretty bizarre what I see. I can see they've stopped to look at me, and one's tall but the other's relatively small. They're dressed exactly the same. They have kind of like a weird half pointy hat on, and kind of not exactly a robe but some kind of gown on, in a weird black but waxy outfit. It's different from what the mannequin was, but they don't say a word. I call out and do a big Y symbol with my hands trying to get their attention, but this doesn't work. I have a weird feeling about this, and this is another weird thing. They both start walking towards me, literally into the water. They walk until they're about head height until they just stop, and seem to vanish underwater. Now, this only took about 10 seconds, and I decided I was going to wait them out. And finally they resurfaced again. Now both going in different directions, one is going towards our station place and the other is coming more towards me, walking slowly along the shoreline. Now, I'm pretty confused here. I go around to look at that mannequin thing and it's still there, but I decide that it's probably best if I get away from whatever this is. Now, annoyingly, I have to kind of trek through some of the more foresty area to get back. I wait for a little bit just to figure out where they're going, and definitely one's coming towards me, but annoyingly it's kind of blocking off the safe route that I already come along. I decide that I am going to have to go through this much more treacherous area, but that's fine. I've got some pretty good boots for it. Now, for some reason I didn't feel terribly under threat at this point. It's probably because the area was so nice and it was quite a good sunny day, so I didn't feel too bad. The only way I can describe my feeling is like something was just way off and I saw something I wasn't supposed to. Now, again, I don't always react with the best survival instincts, so I didn't have anything to arm myself. I just decided to pick up a stick. Funnily enough, it wasn't even a big one, but I guess I could have launched it at somebody if needed, and maybe they would flinch react and that would give me time to run away, so yes, this is the escape plan. Now, this scarecrow thing goes out of sight for quite a while, and I just stop. I think, well, why am I getting so scared of this? Is this really a threat? Or am I the ranger here? Who's in control of the situation? And I relax myself a lot more. Now, I'm stood like this for probably about 20 or so minutes, just really confused as to what to do. And I now realise that I was probably in shock a little bit, but at the time I didn't know that. I just thought I was dealing with the situation accordingly to what I could see around me. And now, as I'm standing there, I can hear something breaking through the trees. I think, God, what now? And I quickly take a step back and I manage to get behind a tree. And I then catch sight of it. I can see one of those things now. It's a smaller one, but where its face should be, it's wearing some kind of skull mask and it has black face paint on. Now, I'm telling you this because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I really couldn't. And what do I do in this situation? I get my stick and throw it as far as I can to try and distract this thing. And then it dances towards it, almost like a dog going after some kind of treat or animal, but literally dancing while doing so. I now have some real fear running through my bones, and I start making my way in the opposite direction. Now, I couldn't hear this thing, it almost just gone silent again, and whatever this is, person or God knows what, didn't seem to be following me, and I let my guard down a bit. I've now come to the conclusion that there's some pretty weird cult people out here, and maybe they're trying to get me, and maybe, just maybe, I've come across some kind of crime scene they don't want me to know about. So, I have to start making my way now, tediously, around the lake, to try and get to relative safety, and my mind slips. I completely forget about the other one. Now, I make it probably about halfway across to the relative safety, and where I have a truck, but I hear something up ahead of me again. This time it sounds much more forceful and quick, so I quickly duck down. I laid there for probably a good 5 minutes until I lock eyes with it. It was an animal. I can't remember exactly what animal it was like a big rodent, but it slowly makes its merry way towards the water, and I kind of cursed myself a bit just for being so scared. I say, come on, you have to get a hold of yourself and get a grip now. Now what's especially bizarre is that's when I notice it. What appears to be a body floating in the lake. I now realise that this is that thing I'd moved earlier. It was now floating further across, and I observe it until it comes up on the bank again, and then I see it. That person goes to grab it, but they're assisted by another one, equally as tall as them. I now realize that there's at least 3 people here. They're dressed exactly the same, and they drag this over to the shore and leave it there. Now, I was really glued into the spot for quite a long time. I'd actually stared at this whole event taking place for so long that when I looked away, my eyes took a long while to adjust to not looking at bright things again. And it was almost like, I don't know what you call it, snow blindness, but I was pretty much experiencing a form of this. Because I'd been staring at God knows what this was for so long now. And I'll take a deep breath, look around and realise that I'm gonna have to get myself out of here. Now I'd actually gone off the path that I was on earlier, and I'm on a bit of a rough area a little bit, and it's not really good for crossing. I now know that I can take the long route to get back, and that's what I decide to do. I have to crawl across some areas and I'm probably gonna get wet, but that's kind of the least of my issues at this specific point. I can kind of go into one of the streams that actually feeds a larger lake that I've just come from, and I'm kind of doing like a military prone crawl around here. I don't know who these folks are, but for all I know there could be 100 of them out of here, and I'm on my own, so even though I'm not the smallest and I'm a little bit built, I really don't like my chances, and things like this really give me the heebie-jeebies, so yes, it's time to escape. Now, as I'm crawling, I don't hear anything. I still have another stick that I've picked up, and for some reason it made me feel a lot more safe. Maybe it's some kind of primitive thing and that's why cavemen always seem to have sticks, but in this specific moment that's what made me feel better and that's what counts. I wasn't that far away from safety, but I come up to the first kind of wetland area and I really feel a bit cold because of the water. I've also managed to scratch up my elbows and my belly and my knees a bit, and I'm now bleeding. I was a little bit worried about getting infected because it's quite dirty here, and you can imagine there's all kinds of bacteria and insects, and I hate both. I know some of you are probably asking, why did I do this job if I don't like those things, and I can't tell you that. I don't really know myself. But now, I'm not too far away from the relative safety of things that I know. I managed to come up to kind of like a clearing where I can actually see across to the lake. I'm pretty worried now that maybe they've followed me around but there's no one in sight. Now my own breathing was pretty heavy now, but then I hear another kind of breathing not too far away from me. This sounds like quite a heavy breathing, almost like it's being filtered through something. Not exactly like Fader's one, but maybe 10% similar. Almost like that you're wearing something over your face. Not a scarf, but like a plastic one. And I stop dead. I can hear this breathing, but I can't figure out where it's coming from. I know it can't be far away. It never seems to get closer though. And now I don't have the element of surprise because I cannot gauge it. I try my best to stay still and I feel my legs starting to shake, so I tense up my leg muscles and stop myself from shaking. Now this breathing does not stop whatsoever, and I'm now at a point where I must go forward to try and get to better things, and I decide that I should slowly but carefully crawl my way forwards once again. I decided that I wasn't going to stop crawling no matter what, and that's what I start doing. Now I realise that the breathing sound is slowly getting further away with each crawl that I make forward. I managed to get about 5 minutes further from this point and I can't hear the breathing anymore. I decide it's safe to look up, and that's when I see it. Some dark figure not too far off, but this time on the other side. That's when I can see it. There's burning. I try and figure out exactly where this thing is specifically, and I'm able to approximate it to where I saw that wetsuit thing before, or the farm figure, whatever it is. There's a very thick black smoke coming off of it. I'm quite worried now that there's going to be a forest fire, but it doesn't seem likely because it's close to the shore, but that raises the question. How did that fire start and why is it there? Now, I'm not sure what to do at this point, and I start crawling again. I'm not sure whether there's multiple fires or only one, but I know that I'm not going to stick around to find out. And I eventually crawl up to the point that I'm not too far away from the station now. I start to feel a little bit better, and then I feel it breathing on my neck. Now, I don't know if any of you have ever experienced this before, but my god, man, it's like somebody takes your soul. It's almost like your brain accepts, maybe it's some kind of prehistoric man thing, but it accepts that you've been captured and you have a second to make a decision. So, with my stick in hand, almost like it was second nature, I turn around and swing as hard as I can, literally with my eyes closed, and there it is, whack. I feel a sudden pain in my hand, and I realise that I'm bleeding. My hand's now wet. I realise that some of the stick is shattered and splintered into my hand, and that's when I see it. Somebody hits the ground with a large thud, and I can't make out a face, but they're dressed in some really weird kind of occultist outfit. It's like a weird dark robe, and then I get up and run. Now this person was pretty big, probably 6 feet and at least 200 pounds, but I couldn't stop to take in too many details, and before I knew it, I make it back to the station, and I actually take off my shirt to try and stop my hand from bleeding because I was worried I was going to bleed out. I quickly get in and scream on the radio for backup and help. While the radio's still on, I make a call out to the local fire responders and say that there's a fire here. I'm not sure what to do, so I quickly go to the kitchen area and get all of the knives and hide them away. I get the biggest one I can find and I grab that. I lock all of the doors and stay on the radio with my friends, who are also my colleagues here. They can't believe what I'm telling them, and apparently the fire people are going to get there first. I warn them that there's strange individuals out here, and they say they understand. It must have took about another 40 minutes though of waiting in agony before they finally get here. And once they do, I quickly point out to where the fire was. It's now gone out, and they say that they're going to investigate. Eventually a few others who work here also arrive, and some law enforcement too, and they say that they're going to take over the search from here. I give the exact location of what had happened, and one of the policemen who's first aid trained actually helps to get my hand patched up. I'd really hurt my hand, but luckily it wasn't broken or fractured, which is a good thing. Now, I ended up waiting in that station for quite a long time, until eventually the fire people come back first and say there's no signs of fire, just some ashes, where something was burned. They said it was clothing, but they couldn't determine which because of the fire. But there was definitely no immediate threat, and that was a relief. That was my biggest fear. A beautiful place like this should not burn to the ground, and if there's one person that can stop it, I'm gonna make sure it's me. Now second, the police come back and say that they really can't find anyone, and they ask for an entire report of exactly what had happened. I give them everything, and they kind of doubt what I was saying, constantly saying, "Are you sure this is what happened?" And I say yes, and they start doing some weird things, like asking if I've taken any prescription drugs or anything. I say yes. How do you think this happened to my hand? And they say that they're going to keep some people stationed here and try and investigate until they find out what's happened. Now, eventually I got put to a different area. In fact, it wasn't even to do with the forest, it was actually on the admin side. Eventually I had to leave the job because I just couldn't bear the thought of going back there. Now, we were never able to find out exactly how many people were there, or what they were doing, or why they were there. And since there's no reports of similar events happening, I can only imagine that it was some kind of cults doing some really weird, ritual or whatever they want to do out there. And maybe they were trying to capture me for some kind of human sacrifice or God knows what. I'm just very happy that I managed to stop at least one of those and give them a taste of their own medicine before they got me. Now the following is a series of weird things that happened to me that I truly can't explain. Now what annoys me most about this is that I've tried to tell people my experience and they kind of just laugh it off. Actually, I told one of my colleagues at work today. I work as a forest server fire patrol person, but when I told them my story, they kind of just laughed at me and said, "Oh yeah, is that really what happened?" And that really annoys me. And this is supposed to be someone that's quite similar and that I'd actually consider a friend there, and also had weird experiences before, so I just don't get it. People are so eager to hear what you say, but then they're so happy and quick to dismiss everything. I just don't get it. But let's dive into my story and hopefully at least a few of you will understand. Now, emotionally, I wasn't really the same after this. I don't know why. I'm not a spiritual person and I don't really believe in religion much, but this kind of made me think about what else is really out there. Where I live, there can be lots of snow all the time, but I love to go on my little adventures, and there was a forest that was supposedly haunted near where I lived. Now I'd heard quite a few things about this place, and apparently you'll hear screams in the night, you'll see headless people wandering around, and I guess just the works really. Now I'd actually been here on 2 occasions before. One was when I drove out with one of my friends, but to be honest, it was just the biggest waste of time. I mean, literally nothing happened. We were driving for a long time to get there, and basically nothing happened and we just get bored and come back. So I wasn't expecting too much in the second time that I'd been there. Again, nothing had happened, but in more recent times, I'd moved much closer and thought, why not go? Also, there was quite a nice snowfall, so I thought this was pretty cool. I really like going on adventures at night time like this, especially when the elements are involved. For whatever reason, it kind of makes me feel almost like I'm in a movie. Especially if I've got my AirPods with me and I just listen to songs, and it really creates a vibe. I always found it empowering, but yeah. So I set out at night, and I walked towards the forest off of the main path, and it's really dark. The stars are looking absolutely beautiful above me, and luckily there's no cars coming, so I just get off and straight into where the forest starts. There was probably about 30 meters of snow or whatnot before it actually starts. Then you're hit by lots of trees. Now I turn my flashlight on and suddenly I can see really well. I had a really powerful one that was actually adapted for cameras and stuff. I was actually joking with one of my friends, it's like turning on the daytime and there's nothing to be scared of. And I also said that this probably scares away the spirits more than anything. They probably think it's God. I think of these jokes as I can see my breath in front of me from the cold. Now, it's kind of like the snow that's fallen quite quickly to the ground, almost like it's kind of sleet, but it's not. It's still snowing. I notice it as I take my first steps into the forest. I have some pretty skinny trees on either side of me when I see something that looks odd. I can see what appears to be a white silhouette to my left when suddenly it vanishes. I'm a little confused by this, but suddenly I realise that it must be my breath from where I've got my scarf and things. I think it's a little odd and I tell myself just relax a bit, and I keep walking. The trees are kind of like overarching here and it actually looks really beautiful. I do notice one odd thing. There seems to be footprints that lead off from the main trail, but they kind of look like hoof shapes. I thought maybe some kind of animal went through here, or God knows what. It couldn't have been horse riding because the branches are actually too low. To give you an idea, they're probably about 8 feet above me or dropping down to 5, so you'd have to duck sometimes. Now these aren't nice branches too. They're the kinds that come snagged on each other, and if you make one loose, it's going to kind of whip you in the face. And I didn't want to lose my eyes. But it wasn't too much of an issue really. So when I set off, I didn't really have a direction or place that I wanted to go to. I heard there was an old church that used to be here, and I thought, you know what, that would be pretty cool if I can find that. Who knows what would happen if I go there on my own. Now at the time, I was certain no other people around because I literally can't hear anything or see anyone. A really good telling sign is the fact that there's no lights. You kind of need lights to see where you're going out here, but I literally couldn't see any. Every so often, I look off into the woods and I don't see anything. I did notice one or two strange sounds, but they didn't happen too frequently. I know that there's lots of animals out here because of my normal line of work, and just I guess from having some good sense about my surroundings, so I didn't let it put me off. I knew I had to be careful of certain animals out here because I guess some could hunt at night, but I was going to be far bigger and they wouldn't dare go to me. The sky almost looks like a beautiful orangey colour above me because of my torch, and I think that's really pretty. I do start to feel the cold a bit now, so decide to pick up the pace. Another interesting thing is there's lots and lots of footprints on this path which have been here earlier. And I think that's a little bit bizarre because usually people don't hum here too often. I'm very used to going out here and there's no one around. So that was interesting. As I'm walking, the snow's now going directly into my face and it actually made it a bit annoying, to be honest. I stopped for a moment to try and figure out the direction of it so I can try and avoid it when I hear a howling off. Now I don't know exactly where it's coming from, but there seems to be another little trail where you can cut through going off of the main path, but I decide not to follow it just in case. I was kind of expecting to run into some crazy dog walker or something, but they never showed up, so I think this is a little bit odd. Eventually I come up to one of the trail signs and I can see some of the wildlife that lives here, and I think to myself, well, there's definitely nothing that's gonna hunt me, as it's just birds and things like that. But I do wonder what the sound is that I heard. Now, I go a little bit further along and eventually the snow picks up even more now. It felt a little bit different and almost like the weather had become more hostile now. Again, I'm not a spiritual person, but it almost started to feel a bit more like the air was different here. Now, the only way I can describe what I was seeing if you haven't been in the woods at night in the snow is everything sort of looks like an infinite dream. It's almost like somebody's made an unlimited map of just forest, snow, woods, and it's just going to keep on going forever. You do have to be careful out here though, because if you really go off the path, then you don't want to be stuck out in the cold like this. As you can imagine, trying to get a fire going is not easy at the best of times, let alone here. As I'm thinking of this, I hear sounds up above again. I can hear somebody scurrying through the tree line. Well, at least that's what I think it is. And I pause for a second, and I go to switch my flashlight with one that has more of a focus beam. And I kid you not, as this is happening, I can see what appears to be a really small kind of lanky armed person scurrying through the woods. And I take a moment to figure out what this is. I quickly flicker on my other light, which is more powerful, and I don't see anything, so I just put it down to my mind going a little bit loose. I do have to say, I've never seen anything like this, and I think this is really weird. Annoyingly, my eyes didn't adjust well enough in the darkness to actually see this thing, and I have tried telling this part to some other people, but again, they all just say, oh yeah, it's just a rabbit. But I mean, come on, I've seen rabbits, and this thing had lanky arms. I can only describe it as if a person was about 3 feet tall, had a very large torso, and very long skinny arms that grabbed the floor. But I don't know where they've gone. I tried looking around for more footprints, but I can't see anything, and this gives me a little bit of adrenaline to pick up the pace. I knew I'd gone out here hoping to find some ghosts and things, but now I wasn't so sure if I actually wanted to find them or not. Now again, I can see a mist form just in front of me, then slowly disappear again. It was a white mist, and it's really like somebody's just breathed in front of me and then vanished. I try and replicate how I was standing a few moments ago and pace backwards and start breathing more heavily to see if it was me, but there's nothing there. Pretty confused at this point, but I decided to just pick up the pace more. Now, I had one other scary experience before from being out in the woods I can think of now, but this was more to do with an animal than anything supernatural. I remember I'd gone somewhere and a big old moose appeared and it was extremely close to me. For whatever reason, it didn't really take notice of me, it just looked at me for a second, but I remember that scared me. But that feeling that I had was kind of beginning to loom over me, and I started to wonder if maybe there was a large animal like that around. Now this is when I noticed the first strange structure. It's something that I hadn't realised before. It's a large wooden structure that looks like 3 trees, kind of in a Stonehenge shape, but a little bit less spread out. This is really weird. It's like they've been carved by hand and placed upright. And what was really bizarre is that there isn't much snow in the middle. It seems like the ground is staying particularly dry here, and not snow forming. Now, I think this is really bizarre because, well, where I am there shouldn't be anything like this. I would have been aware of it too, and I don't understand why I'd never noticed it before. It now becomes apparent that I'm not actually on the main path. I switch off my flashlight once more, and I just take a few seconds to take in everything. I'm trying to give my eyes some time to adjust to the darkness, and I look down at my battery. It's dropped down to 40% on the main flashlight thing, and that's a bit of a worry. Batteries drain pretty quick in the cold, and now I notice that there's more of the mist forming up ahead of me. I actually take a second just to assess what this actually is, but I can't figure out what it is. It's almost like a group of people standing there, kind of just like breathing or talking normally, but there's no one around, and it only seems to be spawning in a specific spot. Now, I once more get closer and try and figure out what this is, but I just can't. Now, it reminds me of a story of what one of my other Fire Ranger friends had told me about. Sorry to go off topic, but I think it's important because it might have been linked to what I saw. Now, one of my good friends had been working in the service for quite a number of years, and he would always try and prank us and pretend there was scary things out there. We never believed him, and sometimes he would actually get us with Halloween masks and stuff, and that was pretty creepy. But I remember one day that he come up to us and he looked very freaked out. He said, "Guys, I saw something and I don't know what it is." We ask him to elaborate, and he refuses for a while, but because I'm good friends with him, eventually he decides to tell me what he saw. Apparently, he thought he saw a fire, so he went over to investigate it. Apparently it was just a small red cherry glow, but that could be the start of something. Just as he got to where it was, it suddenly went out, and there was a very big mist that appeared, which is like a smoky white colour. It almost looked like there was a huge fire in terms of the amount of smoke, but nothing was burning. He said it stayed here for literally 3 or 4 minutes as he stared at this bewildered, until eventually it just vanishes. Now the reason that I'm telling you this is because it was incredibly similar to what I saw, in terms of how he described it, the way that it moved, the slight opaqueness of it, everything was just weird. I stood there for what must have been about a good 4 minutes before eventually I decided that, yeah, I'm probably gonna have to press through this now. I couldn't be waiting around here all day, and I decided to be brave and walk through it. I actually held my breath just before I did so because I didn't know if it was maybe some kind of dangerous chemical or something that had leaked out, but there wasn't anything. I eventually make it through after what felt like ages, to be honest, and I was actually gasping for breath. It probably took me a good 20 seconds to get through this. Eventually when I do, I turn around to try and figure out where it had gone, and I can't see it. I do think that I can see something just moving off into the distance, but I can't be sure. It was almost like a group of people had vanished, but one of them had just went off into the woods. Now, I'm a little bit freaked out, but again, I was here alone, so there's not really too much I can think of this. Now, I do notice something else very weird. There seems to be lots of really bizarre shaped footprints going off in different directions. They're all kind of like the hoof shaped, like the thing I'd seen earlier, but they're really far spread apart, like something quite tall had been walking. But it's walking as though that it's in complete arrogance to the trees that are there, like they don't exist. And again, I don't know what kind of animal could have done this. Now I walk on. I haven't really got a direction this time. I just know that I need to keep going. I have a feeling that I'm in a bad spot, and that's when I see something. This time I was certain that I was seeing something that was actually there. It was very far away, but I can only describe this as something which is completely black, with these white tusk arm things that was about 4 feet tall that hops around. I only saw this for a couple of seconds and it vanishes, but it's probably the scariest part of the encounter for me. I don't want to describe it as like a demonic thing because again I'm not spiritual, but I don't really know what this was. It's like a really weird creature that would stand awkwardly and almost like it was just bent out too far and shouldn't be balanced, but it was. I flash on both the lights at the same time searching for it, but again I don't see anything. I then realise that I'm not too far from a lake that I'm actually familiar with, and that's when I noticed a strange glow coming from the other side of it. Now, it was kind of like a glow of like a power plant would give, I guess, in the horizon. Almost like heat waves of light just emanating out slowly, again in the white colour, but almost having more of an energy to it. I decide that I have to investigate. Now, I was actually stupidly close to the shoreline now, because one slip, one twisted ankle and I could go through the ice and no one would get me here. I'd die of hypothermia before rescuers could find me, but the sense of adventure had taken over. I turn my light around again, and I can't see anything. For a second, I'm sure I can make out the faint glow of 2 eyes, but I don't know if this is just an animal, so I'm not too worried. There's also strange sounds coming from over where the light is, and it's almost like lots of people talking played backwards, really far off, really far, like barely audible, but I could hear it. The forest was pretty quiet at this time, and I think it made it worse. I'm constantly flashing around with my lights, trying to just get whatever this is to show up more, but I can't see anything. Now, I know some people are asking me why wasn't I more scared of that weird thing I'd seen, and to be honest, I can't tell you that. It was almost like I was drawn into something and a mixed personality had taken over where I was seeing weird things and they weren't welcoming, but they weren't worrying for whatever reason, like I had to go on further. I decided that I need to keep up my pace now, but I have some pretty good thoughts and I think, well, I don't want to fall in the water and die, so I go off now. At this part, the trees are a lot thicker than before, and that was a bit more reassuring. But that lake, I'm constantly hearing sounds from over where that lake is, and I just cannot for the life of me figure out what they are. I actually can't remember the sounds too well, and I don't know if it was because I was in a bit of a heightened state during the experience, but I just remember there were weird sounds, like scratching and things like that. Now I know it could have easily been a group of people on drugs or God knows what, but given the weather conditions, I think that's extremely unlikely. Again, this is something one of my incredible colleagues told me that that's what this could have been, and joking that it was green men and aliens, but I don't understand it, because again, these people are so interested to hear what I was saying, and maybe they're denying it because they're scared of what I'm telling them, or just refused to believe it, but that annoyed me. And I've always been somebody who has the ability to break down the physics of things. If something has happened, I don't immediately go to the irrational explanation. I think with a scientific mind, but it failed me this day, because I can't come up with much for what was happening to me. Now I continue on as the snow gets a little bit thicker now. I think the reason for this might have been because there weren't as many thin trees blocking out all of the snow to capture it. Just quite a few big ones with more space in between, but it did actually make my legs hurt. I noticed my knees are quite cold, so my remedy for this is once again to pick up the pace. I clear some of the snow that's actually settled on me, and I actually feel a bit better now. There's quite a big drop off down to the lake now, and I realise that I'm going uphill. What was weird though is that I haven't been to this area before, and I can't really find it. Even since I've been back to the forest again, I've never been able to find this exact spot. Now, it was like somebody had described the area that I was in to somebody else, and they'd tried to make it but not done it exactly the same. And you kind of know deep down that you're not in exactly the same place, but there's enough familiarity for you to feel confident in the situation. Now, as I get closer to the light that I could see, I realised that this definitely isn't moonlight, because it was kind of flickering like it had an electrical energy to it, and was kind of flashing around into the clouds a little bit. Not like lightning, but kind of like the northern lights, and that was what I find really bizarre. Just the whole energy of whatever this was is like nothing that I've ever seen before. A little bit scared now, I start to slowly pan around trying to see anything, but I can't find a thing. Every so often I hear sounds of movement behind me, but I can't be sure what this is. I decide that I just need to keep it moving, and that was one of the things that made me feel more safe in this situation now. I eventually come up onto the bend and I start approaching towards where the light is directly now. Now again, I'm not too scared or shy of adventures, so I have to keep pressing forward one step at a time. I do notice something odd, and that's that there aren't any steps up here. I know people might not have gone here in the daytime, but it does seem weird because there was just so many earlier that I'd seen pretty much everywhere. The snow had actually slowed down a little bit, and it wasn't as abrasive on my face, and this was quite nice. My nose and toes always seem to suffer, especially in the cold, along with my hands. I think I have a problem where they don't have very good blood, or they just seem to switch off in the cold, but it made the going a little bit tough and less comfortable. Now, had I found the ghost that I was looking for? Not just yet. So I decide that I need to go towards the light. But again, the way that the light is kind of bouncing off the clouds, almost like it's the northern lights, was just really strange. I was incredibly drawn into this, almost like I was looking at a hypnotist's watch. It was incredibly beautiful, but just really weird. I didn't know if it was related to an electrical storm, but it wouldn't really make sense for me. I have seen something bizarre while working on the service, so again, a little bit similar to this. I remembered one time that I was working. I was actually in the station and I just made myself a coffee. I went to step outside and had a look around at the sky at night just because it's so beautiful, and I do notice something odd. There's almost like a large blue electrical ball of light in the sky. It's opaque and not really visible, and it only lasted for a few seconds, but it's like nothing I've ever seen before. A few of my colleagues had actually reported seeing it as well while on duty at the exact same time that I did, and this kind of had the same characteristics, but it wasn't identical. But I want to find out what this is, and I wasn't as scared as I was before. Now the closer I get, there's something else I notice which is pretty bizarre, and that's that the sky seems to be kind of imitating this very loosely. It's almost like somebody turned on a pulse of electricity through the clouds above me. It's almost like the northern lights are above the whole sky now, but extremely faint, but the same colour as the clouds, so again, it's almost like they were pulsating a bit. I did get scared because there's a eye condition that someone in my family has, which is actually a little bit similar to this, but I've been tested for it multiple times since and after this event, and it's always come up clear. But in the moment, I was pretty scared because I really worry about having issues with my vision. Now, luckily it turned out it wasn't my eyes, and I quickly did some tests by looking at the ground and things that weren't moving to realise that nothing was off. But why was the sky moving? I wasn't so sure what was happening, but I wasn't that far away now from where I needed to be. That's when I noticed another wooden structure. It's similar to what I've seen before, but it kind of formed more of a hexagon type of shape. Every so often I would see these on either sides of the trail, and they seemed to be increasing in frequency as I got closer to the light. I only saw about 3 more of them, but again, never seen it since. I stop for a moment, and I can see my breath on my light as I take my mask down just to try and get a better feel of what was happening. I shine the torch around, but again, I don't see much of anything. Don't know what I was expecting to see. I've just got the glow dead ahead of me now, and I know I have to get there. It's not much longer now before I'm there, so at least I've got that to look forward to, and I can eventually start heading back. I'm not sure how far I'd actually come at this point, but I've probably been walking for about a good 50 or 60 minutes. It doesn't sound like much, but usually you'll feel it more than I was in this situation, because walking in the snow is actually really difficult sometimes, and the cold can kind of zap out all of your energy. Now, I'm not too far away from where this is, and I can hear the voices again. It sounds like whispering. I can make out the odd word or two, but nothing seems to be in a language that I understand. It's definitely in a language though, and it hasn't increased in volume or anything since when I first heard it earlier. I don't know if it was there the whole time because I kind of just zoned out to it, but I suddenly noticed it much more than I had done earlier. And again, this is pretty weird to me because, like I said, I've never heard anything like it, and it was a bit creepy. Now, I eventually come up to the last clearing where the light should be, and I'm quite excited to get here. There seems to be lots of footsteps here everywhere, so I'm pretty convinced that I've made it back onto the main path now. I've got a good feeling now, and I know that there must be somebody there, so I feel pretty happy. So, what do? Take my steps around it. I can definitely hear the voices on the right side of me now, and I keep stopping every couple of seconds to approximate exactly where it is. Every so often I see movement up ahead of me, and I'm convinced that it's people out here now, so I feel much more relaxed and reassured. I'm now going down the last straight part that I have to go to, with the trees kind of forming an arch above me, and the snow still everywhere around me. Now, some people have asked me why did I keep going and what was I actually doing out there. That was my friends at work earlier, and I don't know. I guess it kind of felt like I'd been there for too long and I was at least going to get something out of it, and yeah. So, I continue up and I eventually find where the clearing is, and I realise that I've only got about another 20 feet of a walk to figure out what this is. And I can see movement again. I decide that the best thing to do in this situation is just to slowly sneak up on who or whatever it is up ahead of me. Now yes, I've got them, I think. I can see some more lights ahead too. I'd see 2, then 3, then they go out. I don't have my lights on at this point because I want the element of surprise. The snow is coming against me, but not directly in my face, so this is pretty pleasant. Now, I come up to where I can hear the voices finally getting louder and louder, and my excitement is growing. It feels like I've been here for too long trying to figure out what is actually going on, and I'm gonna get my taste of it soon. I am kind of looking over my shoulder every so often though, because I do hear sounds like I'm being followed. Again, I keep thinking I'm seeing movement, but there's not much of anything when I focus, so I try not to think of it. I don't actually have my torch on now, so I can't verify the fact that there's nothing there. But again, I just presumed it was people. And I thought, well, they haven't said anything to me, and I'm not disturbing them, so why are they going to be annoyed at me? It was almost like an overconfidence, and eventually, I come up to the tree line and the clearing. I start going a lot slower now as I get closer and closer to where I can hear them all. Now the chanting is still illegible, and I take my first step up, and I look around and I can see what must be hundreds of people all standing around the edge of some kind of clearing. They've all got their hands raised up and they're making some weird chanting sound. Now they're not actually that close to me, so it's pretty difficult to make out how tall they are, but these things seem really small. I say things because I don't know if they were people unless they were on their knees, but that's what it looked like. I start to shake a little bit as I feel a lot more like I'm in danger now. I decide that I'm gonna slowly turn my flashlight on for a second and figure out what this actually is. My eyes adjust more and more to the darkness every couple of seconds, and I notice something wrong. They don't look like normal people. The shape of them's all wrong and their arms are too long. And they're all either wearing some white things on their arms, but it looks very pointy, just like the things I'd seen earlier. I try as best I can to slowly flicker on the torch, but I cannot do it. Again, I start shaking more and more and try and press it, but nothing happens. I keep on and on flicking until eventually it flashes on, and for a split second I can see these things. They're like very dark small creatures with weird pointy arms, all facing up to the sky making some weird sounds. Their mouths are what really scare me. It's like just a circle with lots of jagged teeth. And just as I'm taking this all in, they suddenly vanish, and so does the sounds. I quickly fire the torch around everywhere trying to see where they've gone, but I can't see anything. I can hear my heartbeat in my ears like a constant rhythmic drum. And then, a few moments later I hear movement, rustling and the sounds as though hundreds of people are all coming towards me suddenly, and I take off. I turn my torch on and quickly dart up ahead of myself, constantly looking over my shoulder with the torch. What I have just seen, I don't know, but I knew that I was in danger and had to get out of there. Luckily, I can retrace my footprints for most of the journey until I get away from the clearing. I can hear the sounds are still coming after me, just much slower than me, but they're still coming. I stop for a second and fire the torch around everywhere but can't see anything, and I drop it. Now, I managed to drop it not only into the snow, but face first, and that also means there's no light illuminating back at me, it's kind of buried. Just as I say to myself, you've got to be kidding me, I can hear something else not far up ahead of me. So I take off. Thank God I actually brought the other torch with me, because I'm absolutely certain at the fact that I would have had cardiac arrest otherwise. Now, the only problem I've got is the other torch isn't that easily accessible right now. I put it away when I was trying to hide and be not heard, but now I'm starting to think that wasn't really a good idea. And because I've had this on and so close to my face, I haven't really adjusted to the dark, and I don't know where I'm going. I used to be quite good at long distance cross country, so I have that in my favour, but I soon realise those years are way behind me, and I come up to a point where there's two paths. One's much smaller and seems untrodden but should be closer to where I need to get to. The other is what seems to be closer to where the light is, and I have to choose the latter. Now I take off down this path, and I keep fumbling trying to get the other torch on, but for whatever reason I just can't seem to do it. I don't know if it was for the fact that it was in the cold for too long, but in those moments it just would not come back to life again, and I'm just hitting it on my palm constantly. Now it's extremely difficult to navigate in this moment. I think I know where I'm going, but I can't really tell. There's clearly lots and lots of different footprints on this path, and I can't tell if they're normal or not because I was rushing so much, but it gives me some reassurance that I must be going in a relatively good direction to escape whatever this is. Now I should mention at this point that the sounds are long gone. I'd absolutely blitzed something that seemed like it couldn't go much quicker than a light walking pace, but it didn't matter. I don't know what was chasing me or why. I don't know what I'd just disturbed. Eventually, I flick my torch on again, and I illuminate the rest of the way back. I turn it off again quickly because I'm not sure how good the battery is and I really needed to conserve it. I stop for a few moments to collect my breath and look around me, and I think I know my bearings now, and I start to walk. The only reason that I had to walk now is because I was so out of breath and exhausted from moving in the snow that I genuinely was going to have to crawl the rest of the way out otherwise. I now make it up to another clearing where I can see the lake. I look around everywhere, and what's really weird, I can't see the light glow that I saw earlier. It's genuinely nowhere. I was convinced that I should still at least be able to see that out of all things, but there's literally nothing. I don't get it. And the sky, it still didn't look right, but it wasn't like before. So where did the light go? I didn't have much time to focus on it, but I was truly perplexed, and this is something that I still think about now. I managed to get my torch on again, and I don't know, it sounds stupid, but I was trying to recharge whatever energy it was and fire it around everywhere, hoping to see the light again, just to know it was there. But again, I don't see anything. Now, I'm pretty spooked out now, but I have to keep going. I eventually make it into a more familiar area, and I'm actually feeling confident finally. I've adopted more of a walking pace because I was a little bit worried that if anyone was out there and I ran up on them, they might think I was trying to attack them. I do stop constantly though, and look around, desperately trying to see something or anything around me. But again, I can't see anything or anyone. I was desperately hoping that I'd see a group of people, just to explain what I'd seen, or at least to be able to tell somebody, but I can't see anything. The snow's picked up a little bit more now, and it wasn't pleasant. I realised too that I must have been out of here for quite a long while because the battery is virtually entirely drained on the torch. I know because it's gone pretty dim. I probably have the worst torch in the world because when the battery's low it goes really dim to conserve it, but it doesn't last very long, so what's the point? The other light that I have is far superior, but that's long gone. I decide to leave it for whatever's out there to enjoy it. I know I'm never seeing that thing again. I'm someone who usually hates losing things too, but I was so scared I didn't even think about trying to recover it. Now, the trees are getting thinner and thinner, and that gives me a pretty good idea that I'm not too far away from where I need to be now. I can't be 100% certain that I'm back to safety, but this is a pretty good indicator of it being the case. Now, I continue this walking pace, and I'm constantly looking behind myself. Now momentarily, I start shaking again and don't know why. Then suddenly, I realise I hear something making a screeching sound. It's kind of at a medium volume, but it sounds like it's coming from exactly behind where I was. I'm not so worried now because with a few steps, I'm eventually back to where the forest ends, and I'm not too far from safety. I look around for anything to have been following me, but I can't see anything, and I quickly make my way over to my car. I start it up, turn the lights on full, and take one last look into the forest, and I can't see anything. I get back into my car and drive the rest of the way home, completely in shock about the whole experience. Now, I really don't know what happened to me that day, and I truly don't like sharing my story with colleagues at work because they don't really listen to me. But I know what I saw, and I don't know what it was. It could have been spiritual, it could have been anything, but I sure as hell don't have a clue what that was, and that scares me.